Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we take your source material, really dig in, and try to pull out the most fascinating insights.
Mm.
Today, we are definitely embarking on a deep dive. We're looking at some really groundbreaking, maybe even formidable ideas from critical theory.
Yeah, this is pretty complex stuff.
It is. We're basically tracing the path from structuralism to deconstruction.
Right.
And our mission, really, is to cut through some of that academic complexity.
Right.
And show how these thinkers, we're focusing on Jacques Derrida and Paul de Man, offer, well, maybe a powerful new lens, a way to view language, meaning, even reality.
Absolutely. It might change how you listen to things, how you read things.
You might find yourself thinking differently about, well, everything. So let's get started.
Okay. So what's fascinating here is that our journey really kicks off with Jacques Derrida. He's a figure whose influence, it's still incredibly strong, even though he passed away some years ago.
Right.
And later in his career, his thinking really expanded. It wasn't just philosophy. It started to deeply impact ethical and political discussions. He was central to what people often call the ethical turn in, how we analyze texts.
And there was this pivotal moment, wasn't there, back in 1966 at Johns Hopkins University, this conference.
Oh, yeah, that was huge.
It sounds like it was originally set up almost as a celebration, like a coronation for Claude Levi-Strauss.
Yeah.
His structuralist ideas had just really made a splash in the U.S.
Exactly. Levi-Strauss was definitely the man of the hour, or supposed to be. The stage was absolutely set for him.
But then
Derrida gets up and delivers this essay, now incredibly famous, Structure, Sign, and Play in the Language of the Human Sciences. And well, it wasn't just another paper. No, it was widely seen as a direct challenge. Almost like you said, a dethroning of Levi-Strauss. I've read that Levi-Strauss was actually quite bitter about it later on.
That's incredible. A coronation turning into a dethroning. Just like that.
Yeah.
But it's important to get this right. Derrida wasn't just like throwing structuralism out the window, was he?
Not at all. That's a common misconception.
What I find so interesting is that he often seemed to, stand on Levi Strauss's shoulders. He'd quote him, sometimes seemingly in agreement.
Right, using his points to build his own argument.
Exactly. And then he'd subtly point out, well, maybe Levi Strauss didn't quite think this part through. It feels more like an evolution, maybe. Or a complication.
Precisely. It was a really complex relationship. But the impact of that specific essay at that moment, undeniable. It really sparked an almost overnight shift in Western theory.
Wow.
Structuralism had been dominant, mid-60s. But very quickly, deconstruction took over, becoming the sort of main intellectual current through the 70s and early 80s.
And Derrida was right at the center of that wave. He spent a lot of time at Yale, didn't he? As a visiting presence.
He did, and he profoundly influenced a group of really significant figures there. Paul de Man, Jeffrey Hartman, Harold Bloom, J. Hillis Miller.
The Yale School.
That's them. Sometimes called, a bit controversially perhaps, the hermeneutical mafia, because they were so influential and seen as a tight-knit group.
Right. And their work, it was hugely admired, but it also stirred up a lot of resistance, a lot of hostility, famously part of that whole crisis in the humanities debate.
Definitely contributed to that climate. Now, if you, the listener, have ever tried to read Derrida.
I think many have tried and maybe struggled.
Right. You probably find yourself asking, why does he have to write like that? It's notoriously difficult prose.
Yeah.
But that crab-like sideways movement, as it's been called, it's completely intentional. He's deliberately avoiding settling into clear, distinct positions or concepts. He's trying not to create what he calls a transcendental signified.
Okay, transcendental signified. That sounds like one of those key, potentially tricky concepts. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Sure. Think of it as like an ultimate foundation. A core concept like God or reason, or maybe even objective truth that's assumed to exist outside of language, outside of human systems, but gives meaning to everything within the system.
Like an anchor.
Exactly, like an anchor. But Derrida's point is that even these supposed anchors, these foundations, are actually products of language and discourse themselves. They aren't really external or stable. So his writing style kind of reflects that. It resists pinning things down, resists implying there's some fixed center, giving it all meaning.
That makes a certain kind of sense, even if it makes for difficult reading. And he wasn't strictly a literary theorist then, was he? His ideas seem much broader.
No, not really. For Derrida, it's almost impossible to make reliable distinctions between genres. Like, this is literature, this is a legal text, this is philosophy. For him, it's all just discourse, a kind of seamless web of communication. And that web is inherently, as he puts it, full of difference. Everything is always referring to other things within that web, never quite standing alone.
Okay, so it's all discourse. But here's the thing. Maybe this sounds super abstract, but you, listening right now, might already get parts of deconstruction intuitively.
That's absolutely true. You might be more of a deconstructionist than you think.
Let's try an example, something every day.
Okay, think about the Eiffel Tower in Paris.
Right. Iconic.
It's this striking vertical thing, right? A virtual vertical axis.
Mhm.
But when you're actually up in it, it's kind of empty, transparent steelwork.
Yeah.
Yet from that point, suddenly all of Paris seems organized below you. It acts as this arbitrary axis of combination. It organizes the city, but it didn't cause the city. It just comes in sort of belatedly to give it structure.
I love that story Roland Barthes tells about Guy de Maupassant.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, Maupassant hated the Eiffel Tower so much that he ate lunch in its restaurant every single day
Why?
because it was the only place in Paris where he couldn't see it.
That's brilliant.
By putting himself inside it, he was kind of liberated from the idea that it was this governing presence, dictating everything.
That's a perfect illustration. And there's another great one in Wallace Stevens' poem, Anecdote of the Jar. Remember, a simple jar is placed arbitrarily in the wilderness, in the free play of the natural world.
Right.
And the poem says it took dominion everywhere, making the wilderness seem organized around it, even though the jar itself isn't part of nature. It doesn't participate.
So that's Derrida's idea of a center which is outside the structure, like the Eiffel Tower, like the jar. It organizes, but it's not really part of the thing it organizes.
Exactly. A center which is not a center.
And thinking about it more recently, and perhaps more somberly, the Twin Towers in New York, they served a similar function, didn't they? A vertical axis that seemed to order the city, its skyline, its identity.
A powerful symbol.
But their tragic destruction really highlighted how ephemeral, how tenuous those kinds of centers can be, how they aren't as solid or permanent as they seem.
A very poignant example, sadly. Now, if we zoom out again for a second, think about structuralism itself. As a theory, it actually kind of struggled with the idea of change or history.
How so?
It tended to view things as a series of static snapshots, what they called synchronic cross-sections, like looking at still photos rather than a moving film. It wasn't great at explaining how one thing leads to another organically.
Okay.
Derrida's concept of the event, événement in French, is different. He sees it as a rupture, something new breaking in, but also a redoubling, something that emerges. But, and this is key, he argues it has, in some sense, always already been there, latent, waiting to surface.
So when Derrida wrote Structure, Sign, and Play, it wasn't just about critiquing Levi Strauss's structuralism. It was broader.
Much broader. It was a critique of structurality itself, a critique of any system that relies on a center to function as its enabling causal principle.
Right. And this center, it both limits what the system can do, defines its boundaries, but it also enables the free play within those boundaries.
Exactly. But crucially, that center is always positioned as being outside the structure. Like your cookie-cutter analogy earlier, it imposes shape from the outside.
Okay, so if systems rely on these centers, what have these centers been throughout history? Did Derrida talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. He traces the whole history of Western metaphysics as basically a succession of different centers, different transcendental signifieds or first causes.
Like what?
Well, you start with God in a theocentric world. God is the ultimate center, the first cause, the anchor.
Makes sense.
Then, with the Enlightenment, you get anthropocentrism. Man, or reason, becomes the center. Derrida has that line about man invented God, flipping the script.
Right.
And finally, Derrida argues the center becomes language itself.
So language takes the place of God or man. It becomes the new central event that invades, well, everything, our whole way of understanding things.
Yes, but what makes language unique as a center, according to Derrida?
Okay, yeah, what is different about language?
Unlike God or man, which could be conceived as standing outside the system they explained, language is, in his words, perpetually immersed in itself.
Explain that.
Language is always already part of the fabric it's describing. It can't step outside itself to offer an objective viewpoint. It's caught up in the very act of meaning-making.
That is a profound thought. And it suggests that language isn't quite the stable system Saussure's described, is it? We often think of Saussure's model, a concept, the signified, neatly paired with a sound image, the signifier, like tree the idea and tries the sound.
Exactly. Deconstruction really messes with that neat pairing. It questions the very line between language and thought. Derrida even suggests we should maybe abandon signifier as a useful concept because it's too tied to that old metaphysical idea of stable meaning.
So if the link between concept and word is blurred, what happens?
Well, it's not concept to word anymore. It becomes signifier to signifier. The word tree doesn't just point to a stable concept tree, it points to other signifiers, other words like arbor, wood, leaf, green, and so on.
Creating a kind of chain reaction.
Precisely. What he calls the signifying chain. It's this ever self-replicating and self-extending pattern. Meaning isn't fixed in one spot, it's constantly moving along this chain, unfolding in time, referencing other signs. It's temporal, not static.
Okay, that's a radical rethinking of language. And another part of this I find really compelling is Derrida's critique of what he called logocentrism.
Yes, the bias for voice.
Exactly. Metaphysics' hidden bias for speech, for sound, voice, overwriting, script, the graphic mark. Why do we tend to think spoken words are more primary, more present, more authentic than written ones?
It's a really deep-seated assumption in Western thought. Derrida challenges it forcefully. He argues writing isn't just a secondary copy of speech.
How so?
Because voice itself, speech, is also articulated piece by piece combinatorially over time. Just like writing. You could even think of speech, he suggests, as a kind of writing on the ear.
Writing on the ear. I like that.
Yeah, so he fundamentally challenges that metaphysical hierarchy that says voice is primary, original, present, and writing is just derivative, secondary, absent. He sees them as interdependent.
Okay, to help us really get a grip on these ideas, let's focus on a couple of Derrida's key, maybe infamous terms. First up, supplementarity.
Right, the supplement. A supplement normally means one of two things, right? Either it completes something that's lacking, like adding a missing chapter.
Or it adds to something that's already complete, like taking an extra vitamin just in case.
Exactly. So Derrida applies this to signs. Traditionally, a sign was thought to be self-sufficient. But in deconstruction, a sign is always supplementary. It's perpetually proliferating signification.
Meaning it's always spilling over.
Yes. It never quite contains its meaning. It always needs other signs to explain it, which in turn need other signs. It leaves traces of what it's not, of the other signs it relates to. This reveals, as the source puts it, the simultaneously linear and ever-proliferating, ever-self-complicating nature of verbal expression. Meaning is always adding more, always becoming more complex.
Okay. And the second term, difference, famously misspelled.
Deliberately so. With an A instead of an E in the French. Difference.
Why the A?
Because the crucial point of the term, which combines the meanings of both to differ, difference in space, and to defer, difference in time, is primarily visible in writing. You can't hear the difference between difference and difference when spoken in French. They sound the same. But you see the A. It forces you to recognize that meaning different itself isn't just about static relationships in a system space. It's also about the constant postponement, the deferral of meaning over time. Our understanding is always negotiated temporally. It's a brilliant, if tricksy, way to show writing revealing something speech hides.
That is clever. Now, if we loop back slightly, you mentioned Derrida challenging Levi Strauss, but also finding some common ground. Levi Strauss had that argument about language needing to be born in one fell swoop, right? A sudden rupture.
Yes, he argued language couldn't have emerged gradually. It must have been a sudden systemic shift. And Derrida, with his interest in the event as a rupture, definitely saw an affinity there.
But he also critiqued Levi Strauss's underlying assumptions, particularly about nature and culture.
Right. Levi Strauss often implies, or seems nostalgic for, a state of nature that existed before culture. Think ethnography, studying primitive societies. But Derrida's critique is sharp. He says there is no nature unless you already have culture to define it, to think it. The very idea of nature, especially a lost or pristine nature, is itself a product of culture. You can't get outside culture to see pure nature.
And Levi Strauss's most famous book title, The Raw and the Cooked, actually becomes a perfect example for deconstruction, doesn't it?
It really does. It illustrates a core deconstructionist move perfectly. You simply cannot conceive of the idea raw without implicitly having the concept of cooked to contrast it with.
They define each other.
Exactly. It shows the absolute interdependency of these binary terms. It stops you asking which came first, the chicken or the egg, and makes you question whether they can even exist conceptually apart from each other.
So it's crucial to understand this isn't just about flipping the hierarchy, saying cooked is better than raw or vice versa.
No, not at all. It's about seeing that the binary itself, the very division, is the structure, and the terms only have meaning in relation to each other. You see this move all over later philosophy, like Judith Butler arguing heterosexual and homosexual only makes sense in relation to each other.
Okay. Now, we also mentioned Paul de Man, a key figure in the Yale School alongside Derrida, and we have to address his very controversial past.
Yes, it's unavoidable. After de Man died, it came to light that during World War II, in his youth in Belgium, he had written articles for a collaborationist Nazi-sponsored newspaper. Some of these articles were explicitly anti-Semitic.
And this discovery, understandably, caused a huge controversy.
Tremendous furor. It made it very difficult, impossible for some, to read his later deconstructive work without that shadow. There were intense debates, people trying to find links or reading essays like The Purloined Ribbon about Rousseau's failure to confess a youthful theft as some kind of coded, allegorical resistance to confessing his own past.
Right, but it's also important, as our source material suggests, not to leap to the conclusion that deconstruction itself is somehow inherently right-wing or contains some secret fascist code because of de Man's actions.
Absolutely not. What the controversy really highlighted, perhaps, was how differently people react to the core deconstructive idea of undecidability.
Undecidability, meaning you can never arrive at a single, stable, final interpretation.
Essentially, yes. The impossibility of finding a totally secure ground for meaning or judgment. And there seem to be two basic reactions to this.
Okay.
The negative view is that this undecidability creates a kind of intellectual vacuum, a moral void, that allows terrible things like fanaticism or tyranny to rush in. If nothing is certain, anything goes.
And the positive view.
The positive view argues the opposite, that recognizing undecidability requires a perpetually vigilant scrutiny of all opinion. It's a tool against extremism because it forces constant questioning of any viewpoint claiming absolute certainty or authority. Ultimately, the source suggests which way you lean might just be a matter of personal temperament.
That's a really interesting framing. And while we're clarifying potential misinterpretations, let's tackle Derrida's most misunderstood line.
Yes.
There's nothing outside the text.
Oh yes, il n'y a pas de texte.
People often take that to mean Derrida denies reality, right? Like, only books and words are real.
That's the common distortion. But what he really meant was more like, there is nothing but text, in the sense that our access to reality, our knowledge, our experience, is always mediated through language, through systems of signs, through textuality.
So the question isn't, does reality exist?
No, the question is about language's authority for natural or phenomenal cognition. Can language give us direct, unmediated access to what things are? Or is our understanding always shaped, filtered, constituted by the textual systems we use?
As de Man put it quite starkly.
Yes. Ideology is precisely the confusion of linguistic with natural reality. Believing our words map perfectly onto the world is the ideological trap.
Okay, so let's compare Derrida and de Man more directly now. They clearly share some ground.
Definitely. Both seem to struggle with the idea of absolute beginnings or origins. Both see language as this unique event, a new kind of center, precisely because it's caught up in itself, unlike God or man.
And both really insist on the interdependency of binary concepts, like how truth and error aren't simple opposites, but that truth can actually arise from error.
Yes, that's a key shared insight. But then the divergences become really important.
Especially concerning literature.
Especially concerning literature. Unlike Derrida, who tended to see this seamless web of discourse, de Man strongly insisted on the unique status of literariness.
What did he see as unique about it?
He argued that in literature, the code is unusually conspicuous, complex, and enigmatic. Literature draws attention to its own workings, its own language. In a way other discourses often try to hide, it breeds its own formalism.
So literature is special because it's kind of self-aware about being language.
Exactly. For de Man, literature is the disclosure of error that other discourses, like philosophy or science, which often claim direct truth, are usually blind to. Literature knows itself to be fictive, knows it's made up.
It's free from the fallacy of unmediated expression, like your example earlier. If a novel says it is raining, we don't assume the author is making a weather report.
Precisely. It's operating within a fictional frame. And because of this self-awareness, de Man gives literary texts a kind of inherent authority that's perhaps stronger than Derrida does. He famously claims the text deconstructs itself.
Meaning it reveals its own contradictions and complexities without needing a philosopher to come along and point them out.
Kind of, yeah. The deconstructive tensions are already visibly at play within the literary text itself due to its heightened awareness of its own linguistic nature.
And this leads us to de Man's really central argument, doesn't it? the clash between rhetoric and grammar.
Yes, this is core Demo. He argues forcefully that the rhetorical aspects of language, how language persuades its figures of speech, its tropes, and the grammatical aspects, its structure, its logic, its syntax, are not complementary. They don't cooperate smoothly.
They're in conflict.
Irreducibly so. He uses that French example of est, its, and is.
Right, they sound almost identical.
Est signifies being, equivalence, the basis of metaphor. A is B. It aims to complete meaning, a poetic function. S is just conjunction, adding things together, the basis of metonymy and grammatical predication, A and B.
Different functions hidden by similar sounds.
And de Man argues these functions, the metaphorical poetic and the grammatical predicative, are constantly pulling against each other within language, creating an irreducible tension.
He had that brilliant, funny example from All in the Family.
Ah, yes, Archie and Edith Bunker.
Archie asks a rhetorical question, what's the difference? Meaning, basically, who cares? It doesn't matter.
Right, a rhetorical dismissal.
But Edith, in her glorious literalness, hears it as a straightforward grammatical question asking for information. So she starts explaining the difference between lacing shoes over or under.
He loved that example because it shows how a single utterance is simultaneously rhetorical and grammatical, and those two readings don't just coexist peacefully, they clash, they're irreconcilable.
And he does a similar thing with that famous line from Yeats. How can we tell the dancer from the dance?
Yes. The traditional reading is purely rhetorical, right? It's a question implying symbolic unity. You can't separate the dancer, the person, the source, from the dance, the art, the expression. They become one.
That's how most people read it.
But de Man says, wait a minute, read it grammatically. It's a literal question asking for a method of distinction. And the grammatical answer is, well, it's perfectly easy. The easiest thing in the world is to tell the dancer from the dance. One is a person, the other is a pattern of movement.
Okay.
And his point isn't that the grammatical reading is better. It's that both readings, the rhetorical one, unity, and the grammatical one, distinction, are available, valid, and generated by the exact same line of text. They are irreducible and fundamentally uncooperative. They can't be resolved into a single, stable meaning.
So if every sentence, according to de Man, is simultaneously a predication, making a truth claim, referring to the world, and a metaphor, a figure of speech, potentially a poetic lie,
then the sentence's claim to truth and its inherent potential for error or fictionality are perpetually at odds with each other.
which means interpretation never ends.
Exactly. For de Man, the worm of interpretation keeps turning, precisely because rhetoric and grammar remain irreducible. Meaning is always unstable, always flickering between these conflicting poles.
So what does this all mean? Where does this leave us?
Well, if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, I think both Derrida and de Man, in their different ways, really compel us to look critically at the very foundations of how we think meaning and knowledge work.
Right, from those seemingly simple centers like the Eiffel Tower that organize our perception without us always noticing, to the way language itself functions, not as a clear window onto reality, but as this complex, self-involved system full of these inherent tensions.
Exactly. We've seen how what looks stable on the surface is often this incredibly complex interplay of interdependent forces full of gaps and contradictions. And that really raises a fundamental question for us, doesn't it?
You've definitely encountered a deep dive here into that dynamic interplay, rhetoric versus grammar, truth emerging from error, the way meaning seems always already there, yet always deferred. Getting your head around this shift in perspective, recognizing these irreducible tensions. It really does offer a powerful, if challenging, tool for navigating pretty much any field of knowledge. It helps you spot the hidden dynamics.
So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. The next time you encounter a statement that seems perfectly clear or a belief that feels absolutely solid, just pause and consider. If truth can, as de Man suggests, arise from error, if language constantly presents us with these inescapable conflicts between what it seems to say and how it actually operates grammatically and rhetorically, what does that imply about the foundations of your own understanding? How might your own certainty be, perhaps, to just one moment in that seminal adventure of the trace? Always unfolding, always already at play.
Lots to think about there. Until next time, keep diving deep.